So you set aside some money and now you're ready to invest in real estate. That's amazing. Real estate has all sorts of benefits like appreciation and cash flow and principal pay down and tax benefits. A lot of benefits to investing in real estate. But now you're probably wondering, should you invest in traditional long-term rentals or a newer asset class like short-term rentals? That's a good question. My wife and I have both, so I'm going to share with you our experiences and hopefully that'll help you when you make your decision. So let's go. So let's start out by defining what a long-term rental is. And this is pretty simple. A long-term rental is a home or a unit in, say, an apartment that can be rented for, say, 12 months or longer, hence long-term. You also don't need furniture, so it's rented empty. The tenant brings their own furniture. It's pretty straightforward. It's something that's been done for thousands of years. Now let's define a short-term rental, which is basically a home or a unit that's rented out for less than 30 days. It's also supplied with furniture and everything needed to kind of make it home. Now let's start with long-term rentals. The long-term rental model is a proven model that's been around a long time. You're essentially renting out your home or apartment or whatever it might be or condo to somebody else for a long period of time. And there's a lot of advantages to doing long-term rentals. You get all the advantages in investing in real estate, like appreciation, principal pay down, tax benefits, cash flow. All those things are very relevant for you as a long-term rental investor. Long-term rentals, in our experience, are also less work, although it kind of comes in fits and starts. In other words, usually when there's a tenant in there and everything's going fine, it's very quiet. But if there's a turnover, a tenant leaves and you have to put a new tenant in, all of a sudden there's a bunch of work that needs to be done because you need to inspect the unit, make sure it's ready to rent again. If it's not, you need to do some painting or whatever you might have to do. You need to find a new tenant, you need to advertise, you need to run background checks, you need to, all that kind of stuff happens, but it doesn't happen that often with a long-term rental, at least in our experience. As far as income is concerned, it's very steady and very predictable. You set a rent amount in your lease, and that's what they pay every month. And whenever the lease gets to be renewed, you can adjust that amount up or down. And it's very predictable. That money comes in every single month as long as the tenant's making the payments, which in our case, they typically do. Another thing about long-term rentals that we really like is the fact that the regulations are very stable. So long-term rentals really fall under standard landlord-tenant laws. These laws don't change very often. So you know sort of the environment you're getting into and the rules you need to follow when you get into long-term real estate. So we like that about long-term rentals. When it comes to wear and tear on your property, I think it's a bit debatable. If you have a tenant that takes care of the property, it's very little wear and tear, frankly. But if you have a tenant that doesn't take care of the property, it can be a lot of damage you need to repair later. So there's definitely some variability there when it comes to the wear and tear, and that's just our experience. We're fortunate right now that we have some great tenants in our properties, and they all make payments every month right on time, and they also take care of the property, which is great. That's the ideal situation that you want to be in, which makes it so important to be able to select the right tenant. Because this is one of the things about long-term rentals is that once you select somebody and they move in, they could be in there for years. So really selecting the person and making sure it's a good fit is really important, and making sure they can make their payments and all that is key to making it work. So now let's talk about short-term rentals. So short-term rentals are sort of the new kid on the block. Honestly, these things have been around for decades. You know, there's vacation markets that have been renting homes for a week or so for 50 years, 100 years. But it has been really probably the last 15 years or so with the advent of Airbnb and VRBO, that these platforms and the internet are now making it a lot easier to rent and to put your property on their platforms. So short-term rentals have really taken off over the last 5 or 10 years or so. And one of the biggest advantages of short-term rentals is the income. You can make substantially higher income with a short-term rental than you can a long-term rental. In our case, our short-term rental can make, close to 4 times the long-term rental rate. So that is substantial amount of income that you can generate. But one of the things you need to realize about short-term rentals is that the income can be quite variable depending on where your property is. In some markets, it's a very strong summer season where you can command the highest rates. And then the winter, it's very slow and you can really ask for not much. So the income can really vary a lot. And this is a big difference from long-term rentals. But you just have to keep in mind that over a year's time, you'll make more money with a short-term rental than a long-term rental, usually. And so that's just something you need to understand as you get involved in it. Another thing we really like about short-term rentals is the flexibility for the owner. So when you put a person in a long-term rental, they essentially occupy that unit or that home all the time. So, we all know that, right? But with a short-term rental, these are very short stays. They could be a couple days, it could be a couple weeks, but there's guests always coming in and out. And as the owner, you can say, look, I want this certain week blocked so that nobody can book it so that I can stay in it, which is something we really like. I mean, you could actually use your property in the middle of renting it as a short-term rental, which is a nice benefit. Many people like to do this with their lifestyle assets, things like maybe they want to buy a second vacation home somewhere on the beach, let's say, and they want to rent it out short-term. But, they'll stay at it occasionally to enjoy the property, but rent it out the rest of the time. That's totally doable with short-term rentals. Another big advantage with short-term rentals is the tax advantages. Now, you get really all the advantages you get with real estate, you get with this. So there's something called a short-term rental loophole. And this is basically a tax strategy that I've used personally that has saved me a ton of money in taxes. And I think you would find it really useful. Now, I'm not going to go into it very much here because that's not what this video is about. But I did create a video just on the short-term rental loophole, which you can check out right here. Now, something else about a short-term rental that I alluded to towards the beginning of this video is that you need to design it, furnish it, make it look great, make it an attractive place to stay. And in our case, for example, neither my wife and I, we're not designers, so we actually hired an interior designer to help us decorate and design our property so that short-term rental will be attractive to guests, and it's worked. So that's something that you don't have with long-term rentals. You have to worry about that. But it's important for short-term rentals to make sure that they do the best they can, is to have a nicely designed property that'll attract people to stay there. So it takes cash to buy furniture, to pay for a designer like we did. It takes money to buy special insurance that you'll need for the short-term rental. So some of the expenses are a little higher for short-term rentals, but it makes sense. The income is a lot higher too, so it evens out. In terms of wear and tear on the property, I don't think there's that much of a difference between short-term rentals and long-term rentals, at least is what we've seen. But the big difference really comes in the furniture. When you're renting a home on an Airbnb or VRBO and you include furniture, people are using that furniture. They're not taking care of it like they take care of their own furniture. So it tends to wear out more quickly, and which requires you to really upkeep it. So there is wear and tear on the actual furniture, but the property itself, we haven't really seen that big of a difference. Something else that's different about short-term rentals is the regulations. I mentioned before that long-term rentals, it's a very stable regulations. The landlord-tenant laws really don't change. They're basically the same. Whereas the regulations in short-term rentals are changing a lot right now. Almost every city or every area in the country either has some regulations they've enacted or they've been thinking about bringing regulations on, which is frankly a little concerning. So when you get into a short-term rental, you need to be very cognizant and aware of what the regulations are in that area to make sure that you're really taking into account the potential risk you're getting into. The last thing you want to do is to buy a home that you want to rent out as a short-term rental. You furnish it, you pay all this money, and all of a sudden a regulation comes out that says you can no longer be a short-term rental, that'd be the worst, right? So you can always sell the house, but you're going to lose money. So you have to be really careful when it comes to regulations as far as the market you're getting into. And the final thing and biggest thing I want to drill home when it comes to short-term rentals is the fact that it takes a lot more work than a long-term rental. Just like these videos take a lot of work to create. So if you wouldn't mind, just take a moment and hit the like button so YouTube knows that people are enjoying this video and they'll share it out with others. Now, what do I mean by a lot more work? Well, you've got guests coming in and out all the time. You've got messaging, you've got to arrange for cleanings, you've got to arrange for handy people to come by and fix things. There's just a lot more activity that happens with a short-term rental. You have to market it, you have to price it correctly. Yeah, there's just a lot of moving parts. And I think some people get into short-term rentals thinking, oh, great, I'll just put some furniture in there and it'll run by itself, it'll be great. And that is not the case. I tell people that having a short-term rental is really like owning a small business, a hospitality business, more than it is a real estate investment. Because yes, while you're buying a home and you're investing in that real estate, it's really operating that short-term rental, which takes work. And if you're not willing to do that work, then it's probably a good idea to find a property manager or something called a co-host, somebody that can help you manage that property, because it takes time and it takes skill to be very good at it. So if you're not willing to learn and get good at managing a short-term rental, then I recommend hiring somebody to help you do that is an expert in this area and can really make your investment in your Airbnb business the most profitable possible. If you do have time and you do have interest, then I definitely recommend doing it on your own if you can, because you're going to learn a whole lot about how to do it, and you're going to appreciate the amount of work it takes. And you're also going to save a lot of money by not having to pay a property manager or a co-host. But again, if you have no time and you have no interest in managing it, then hiring somebody else to do it for you is the right move. So at the end of the day, it's really your decision. Do you want more steady, reliable income that is probably going to be less work for you? Then maybe a long-term rental is the right solution for you. But if you're looking for maximizing your return and are not afraid of diving in and learning something new, then maybe a short-term rental is good for you. So either way, you can't go wrong. Long-term rentals or short-term rentals are both real estate investing, and that's something that everybody should be doing. So let's say you've watched this video and you're like, I think I want to try a short-term rental. Well, I created a video that talks about the pros and cons of a short-term rental in more depth, which you can review right here. So thank you for watching the Immigrant Wealth channel.